My wife always wanted a man who'd gamble for her affections. Turns out, she meant that literally. He wins more in one night than you earn in a year. Selene's words hung in the air like smoke from the casino floor, acrid and impossible to ignore. She stood in our kitchen, still wearing that lucky red dress I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one that used to make me feel like I'd won something precious. Now it just looked expensive and wrong on her. I'm Daniel Farrow, 42 years old, and I fix computer security systems for a living. Not glamorous, but steady, reliable, the kind of work that keeps the lights on and the mortgage paid. At least, it used to be enough. Brick Cavanaugh, she continued, like his name was some kind of magic spell. You should see him at the tables, Dan. He's got this presence, this confidence. When he bets, people watch. When he wins, they applaud. When I win at anything, she barely looks up from her phone. Selene worked as an events manager for the downtown convention center, organizing corporate parties and wedding receptions. She was good at it too, had this way of making people feel special, important. I used to think she saved the best of that charm for me. These days, I wasn't so sure. Are you even listening to me? She snapped, her green eyes flashing with irritation. Every word, I replied, though what I was really listening to was the sound of our marriage cracking like old wood under pressure. This Brick guy sounds fascinating. She missed the sarcasm entirely. He is. He really is, Dan. He's got stories from Vegas, Atlantic City, underground games in Chicago. He's lived more in 37 years than most people do in a lifetime. Unlike your boring husband who's never been further from Minneapolis than a tech conference in Milwaukee, I thought but didn't say. Instead, I asked, how exactly did you meet this legend? At the Mystic Lake Casino. I was there with Jenna and Marla for girls' night last month, remember? You said you had to work late on that Patterson Industries account. I remembered. I'd spent the evening debugging their network security while she was apparently debugging our marriage. He bought us drinks, she continued, her voice taking on that dreamy quality I used to love when she talked about our future together. Not just any drinks, top shelf everything. The bartender knew him by name. Other players kept coming over to shake his hand, ask for advice. Sounds like quite the celebrity. Don't be like that, Dan. I'm just saying, it's nice to be around someone who thinks big, you know? Someone who isn't afraid to take risks. The implication stung, because it was partly true. I was cautious by nature and by profession. In IT security, paranoia pays the bills. You assume everyone's trying to break in, steal something, cause damage. You build walls, set traps, monitor everything. Maybe that approach had leaked into the rest of my life. But marriages aren't networks, and wives aren't data to be protected. So, what exactly are you telling me, Selene? She turned away, staring out our kitchen window at the neighbor's perfectly manicured lawn. Mrs. Chen was out there with her watering can, tending to her flowers like they were grandchildren. Some people had simple problems. I'm telling you that I'm not happy, Selene said finally. I haven't been happy for a long time. There it was. The conversation I'd been dreading for months, maybe years. The one that starts with complaints about excitement and ends with lawyers and paperwork. What would make you happy? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. I don't know. Something different. Something more. Something more. That phrase had been Selene's motto for as long as I'd known her. More excitement, more money, more attention, more everything. I used to find it charming, her hunger for life. Now it just felt exhausting. I see. I set down my coffee mug, noting the chip on the handle I'd been meaning to fix. And Brick Cavanaugh represents this something more? She whirled around, her face flushed. It's not about him specifically. It's about what he represents: freedom, adventure, the willingness to bet everything on a single hand because you believe in yourself that much. Or because you're an addict who can't help himself. That's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding you back, Dan. You see risk, he sees opportunity. You see danger, he sees possibility. I saw a man who'd probably charmed my wife right out of her wedding ring, but pointing that out seemed counterproductive. Okay, I said instead. So what happens now? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She'd been building up to this moment for weeks, I realized, rehearsing her grievances and justifications. But she hadn't thought much about the practical aftermath. I need some time, she said. Space to figure things out. How much space are we talking about? I'm going to stay with Jenna for a while, just until I can think clearly. Jenna Morrison lived in a studio apartment above a yoga studio downtown. It smelled like incense and disappointment. If Selene thought that was an upgrade from our 3-bedroom house in the suburbs, she was welcome to it. When? I asked. Tonight. I've already packed. Of course she had. This whole conversation was just a formality, a courtesy she felt obligated to provide before walking out. I wondered if Brick was waiting in the parking lot, engine running, ready to whisk her away to whatever adventure came next. Anything else I should know? She hesitated, and in that pause, I saw the truth she wasn't quite ready to speak out loud. This wasn't about space or time or figuring anything out. This was about trading up to a better model, one with more horsepower and fewer miles. I'm sorry, Dan. I really am. You're a good man. You deserve someone who appreciates what you have to offer. The consolation prize speech, every man's favorite. Thanks, I said. That's very thoughtful of you. She studied my face, probably looking for tears or anger or some dramatic reaction she could use to justify what came next. But I'd learned a long time ago that the best defense against emotional manipulation is simple, stubborn calm. You're taking this better than I expected, she said. What did you expect? I don't know. More fighting, I guess. More attempts to change my mind. Would it work? No. Probably not. Then what's the point? She had no answer for that, which was answer enough. She left the kitchen and returned 10 minutes later with 2 suitcases and a garment bag. Everything she thought she needed for her new life condensed into 3 pieces of luggage. I'll call you in a few days, she said. We should probably talk about the practical stuff. Bills, accounts, all that. Sure. I'll be here. She paused at the door, looking back like she was waiting for me to make one last desperate plea for her to stay. When I didn't, she shrugged and walked out into the evening air. Through the window, I watched her load her bags into a red convertible I'd never seen before. Brick Cavanaugh, I presumed, though from this distance he was just a shadow behind the wheel. The car pulled away with a throaty rumble that probably cost more than my monthly salary. She left me for a man with better odds and worse taste in cars. I sat alone in our kitchen, my kitchen now, and tried to figure out what I was supposed to feel. Anger seemed appropriate, but all I could muster was a kind of tired relief, like finally admitting you've been playing a rigged game and walking away from the table. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Naomi. How's married life treating you, little brother? I stared at the message for a long time before typing back, ask me tomorrow. The first week after Selene left passed in a blur of empty rooms and 2 quiet evenings. I kept expecting to hear her key in the lock, her voice calling out complaints about her day or demands for dinner plans. Instead, I got silence and the distant hum of Mrs. Chen's television through the walls. Work became my refuge. Patterson Industries had hired us to overhaul their entire network security system after a breach that cost them 6 figures in stolen customer data. It was the kind of complex, time-consuming project that usually made me grumble about overtime and missed dinners. Now it was exactly what I needed, a problem I could actually solve. You're here early, said Tim Walsh, my supervisor, and the closest thing I had to a friend at Midwest Security Solutions. He was 10 years younger than me, with the kind of nervous energy that came from too much caffeine and not enough sleep. Couldn't rest, I replied, which was true enough. Sleep had become elusive since Selene's departure, Not because I missed her exactly, but because the house felt different. Hollow, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Everything okay at home? Selene moved out. Tim nearly dropped his coffee. What? When? Why didn't you say anything? Last week, and because there wasn't much to say. He sat down heavily in the chair across from my desk, processing this information. Tim was single by choice and philosophy. Claimed relationships were just elaborate forms of technical support for people too lazy to fix their own problems. But he'd always seemed to like Selene, or at least the version of her she presented at company parties. I'm sorry, man. That's rough. You want to talk about it? Not particularly. Okay, but if you change your mind, you know where to find me. I appreciated that about Tim. He didn't push, didn't demand emotional confessions or therapeutic conversations. He just offered and accepted whatever answer he got. The morning flew by in a haze of firewall configurations and access protocols. Technical problems had clean solutions. You identified the vulnerability, patched the hole, tested the fix, moved on. If only marriages worked the same way. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. Selene had posted a new photo, herself and a man I assumed was Brick Cavanaugh, raising champagne glasses in what looked like an expensive restaurant. The caption read, "Living my best life with my favorite risk-taker." Brick was exactly what I'd expected, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of artificially perfect smile that suggested either excellent dental work or natural predator instincts. His hair was styled in a way that probably required more daily maintenance than my car. He wore a suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The comments were predictably supportive. Jenna and Marla chimed in with heart emojis and, "You deserve this." Selene's mother, who'd never particularly liked me, wrote, "Finally," with enough exclamation points to suggest she'd been waiting years for this moment. I closed the app and went back to work, but the image lingered. Not because I was jealous, though I probably was a little, but because it felt like performance art. Look how happy I am. Look how much better this is. Look what you lost. The afternoon brought a call from Naomi. "I heard," she said without preamble. "Jenna's roommate works at the hospital. Word travels fast in the gossip network." Naomi was a nurse at Minneapolis General, which made her part of the most efficient information distribution system in the city. Hospital staff knew everything about everyone, usually before the people involved knew it themselves. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine. That's what you always say. Remember when you broke your arm in high school and insisted you were fine until the bone started poking through your skin? This is different. Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're bleeding internally and pretending everything's normal. I loved my sister, but she had a gift for uncomfortable analogies. What do you want me to say, Naomi? That I'm devastated? That I'm plotting revenge? That I can't imagine life without her? I want you to say something honest. I considered that. What was honest? That I felt more relieved than heartbroken? That I'd been expecting this for months? That the hardest part wasn't losing Selene but admitting I'd probably lost her years ago? Honestly? I think we've been over for a while. This just made it official. Okay, that's a start. What are you going to do now? Keep working, keep living, figure out what comes next. You should get out more, meet people. Jenna's got a friend. No. You don't even know what I was going to say. You were going to suggest I start dating immediately to prove I'm over Selene and capable of moving on. It's too soon, Naomi, for everyone involved. She sighed. You're probably right, but don't become a hermit, okay? Promise me you'll at least pretend to have a social life. I'll consider it. After work, I stopped by the grocery store to stock up on the kind of food Selene had always complained about. Frozen dinners, processed snacks, beer that came in cans instead of bottles. Bachelor food, she'd called it, with the kind of disdain usually reserved for war crimes. The checkout clerk was a kid who couldn't have been more than 19, with facial piercings and an attitude that suggested customer service was beneath his artistic ambitions. "Rough day?" he asked, scanning my collection of questionable nutritional choices. "Rough month." "Yeah, I feel you. My girlfriend just moved in with some dude who owns a motorcycle. Says I lack ambition." "What do you want to be?" "Screenwriter. I'm working on this script about zombies who run a coffee shop. It's a metaphor for capitalism." Sounds profound, right? But apparently that doesn't pay rent. Who knew? I left the store with my groceries and a strange sense of kinship with the pierced philosopher behind the register. We were both men whose women had left them for more exciting options. The only difference was I was old enough to know it probably wasn't the end of the world. At home, I heated up a frozen lasagna and opened a beer, then settled in front of my laptop to do something I knew was unhealthy, but couldn't resist. Social media surveillance. Selene's Instagram had become a carefully curated highlight reel of her new life. Photos from upscale restaurants, selfies in hotel bathrooms, shots of her and Brick at various Minneapolis hotspots. She looked happy, or at least she looked like someone performing happiness for an audience. Brick's profile was more interesting. He posted frequently about his poker games, his wins, his philosophy of risk and reward. "Fortune favors the bold," read one caption over a photo of him holding a stack of chips. "You can't win if you don't play," said another. His followers seemed to be a mix of gambling enthusiasts, attractive women, and people who confused confidence with wisdom. The comments were full of praise and envy, with occasional warnings about the dangers of addiction that Brick either ignored or deleted. I scrolled back through months of posts, building a picture of the man who'd stolen my wife. He was originally from Las Vegas, had played professionally in several World Series of poker events, claimed to have won and lost more money than most people saw in a lifetime. He drove expensive cars, wore expensive clothes, and seemed to believe his own publicity. There were hints of a darker side if you knew how to look. Gaps in his posting history that might indicate losing streaks. Photos where his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Comments from people asking about money he owed them. Quickly deleted but not before being screenshot by more observant followers. Professional gamblers were like professional athletes. For every success story, there were 100 cautionary tales. The difference was athletes usually retired before they lost everything. Gamblers often didn't know when to quit. I closed the laptop and finished my beer, wondering if Selene had done her research or if she'd been blinded by the glamour and the charm. Probably the latter. She'd always been attracted to surface shine, mistaking flash for substance. My phone buzzed with another Instagram notification. Selene had posted a video this time, shot in what looked like a casino. She and Brick were at a blackjack table, her arms around his shoulders as he played. The caption read, "My lucky charm is working overtime tonight." In the video, Brick won a hand and turned to kiss her, the camera catching their celebration. She looked genuinely happy, more animated than I'd seen her in months, maybe years. I should have felt jealous or angry or something. Instead, I felt like an anthropologist studying the mating rituals of a species I didn't quite understand. They were performing for each other as much as for their audience, feeding off the attention and the excitement. Let them have it, I thought. Let them ride the wave as long as it lasted. Because in my experience, waves always crashed eventually. 3 weeks into my new life as a bachelor, I'd settled into a routine that would have horrified the old me. I woke up when I wanted, ate what I wanted, watched whatever was on television without negotiating for the remote. It was selfish and probably unhealthy, but it was also oddly liberating. The house felt different now, bigger somehow, like Selene had been taking up more space than her physical presence required. I'd moved her remaining belongings, the stuff she'd deemed non-essential for her grand adventure, into the spare bedroom. Clothes, books, photo albums from our early years together. Evidence of a life I was slowly learning to live without. Work continued to be my anchor. The Patterson Industries project was expanding as we discovered new vulnerabilities in their system. What had started as a simple security upgrade had become a complete infrastructure overhaul. Tim joked that we were performing surgery with a sledgehammer, but the client was paying well and seemed grateful for our thoroughness. "You're becoming a workaholic," Tim observed as I stayed late for the fourth night in a row. "It's not healthy. Neither is sitting at home feeling sorry for myself. There's a middle ground, you know. Normal people call it having a life. I'll work on it." But the truth was, I didn't want a life yet. I wanted routine, predictability, problems I could solve with logic and persistence. The outside world was messy and complicated and full of people like Selene and Brick who made decisions based on feelings and impulses. My phone had been mercifully quiet. No calls from Selene, no texts asking about bills or belongings or the practical details of separation. I'd been handling everything myself, transferring accounts, updating insurance, making sure the mortgage got paid. It was easier than trying to coordinate with someone who was probably too busy living her best life to worry about mundane responsibilities. But I was still watching, still checking her social media like some kind of digital private investigator. It had become a compulsion, this need to monitor the success or failure of her new relationship. I told myself it was curiosity, but it was probably something less noble. The posts had become more frequent and more elaborate. Expensive dinners, weekend trips to Chicago and Milwaukee, shopping sprees that must have cost more than I made in a month. Brick seemed determined to prove he could provide the lifestyle Selene had always wanted, and she seemed equally determined to document every moment of it. But there were cracks, if you knew how to look for them. The restaurants had gotten slightly less expensive over the past week. The hotels went from 5-star to 4-star to boutique properties that probably charged by the hour. Brick's poker posts had become less frequent, and when he did share wins, they were smaller amounts. The most telling change was in Selene herself. Her captions had become longer, more defensive. "Some people don't understand what it means to really live," she'd written under a photo of her and Brick at a casino buffet. "They're so focused on security and safety that they miss out on all the excitement life has to offer." I wondered who she was trying to convince. My sister called on a Thursday evening while I was debugging a particularly stubborn piece of malware. "How's the hermit life treating you?" she asked. "I'm not a hermit. I went to the grocery store yesterday." "That doesn't count. When's the last time you had a conversation with another human being that wasn't about work?" "I'm talking to you right now." "I'm your sister. I'm required by law to talk to you. I mean, real people, strangers, potential friends or romantic interests." "It's too soon for romantic interests." "It's been a month, Dan. You're allowed to acknowledge that other women exist." I saved my work and leaned back in my chair, considering her point. The truth was, I hadn't even thought about other women. Not because I was still pining for Selene, but because the whole concept felt exhausting. Dating meant explaining yourself to new people, pretending to be charming and interesting, navigating the complex social protocols of modern romance. "I'm not ready," I said finally. "Okay. But what about friends? When's the last time you hung out with someone just for fun?" That was a harder question to answer. Selene had been my primary social connection for years. Her friends had become our friends. Her interests had shaped our weekend plans. Without her, I was realizing how small my independent social circle had become. "I'll think about it," I promised. "Good, because I'm worried you're turning into one of those guys who disappears after a breakup and emerges 5 years later with a beard and a manifesto." "I don't look good with a beard." "That's not the point." After we hung up, I found myself thinking about her question. What did I want my life to look like now? The old version had been built around compromise and accommodation, shaped by Selene's needs and preferences. This new version was entirely mine to design. The possibilities were both thrilling and terrifying. My phone buzzed with a notification. Another Instagram post from Selene, this one a selfie taken in what looked like a much cheaper hotel room. She was alone in the photo, but the caption mentioned Brick being busy with work. Her smile looked forced, and there were shadows under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. I was studying the image when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. Hello? Dan, it's me. Selene's voice hit me like a punch to the stomach. I hadn't heard it in weeks, and the sound brought back a flood of memories, good ones and bad ones all tangled together. Hi, I managed. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. I got your new number from Jenna. New number? I was still using the same phone I'd had for 3 years. Then I realized what she meant. I'd changed our home phone service to a cell-only plan and updated the contact information with our mutual friends. Small steps toward independence that she'd apparently noticed. What's up? I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing. I'm fine. How are you? Good. Really good. Things are great with Brick. He's teaching me about poker, about reading people and calculating odds. It's fascinating stuff. She sounded like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. That's nice, I said. We're thinking about taking a trip to Vegas next month. Brick has connections there, people who can get us into high-stakes games. It could be really exciting. Sounds like it. There was a long pause, and I could hear music and voices in the background. She was calling from somewhere public, probably a bar or restaurant. Dan, I need to ask you something. Here it comes, I thought, the real reason for the call. The credit card, the joint one we used for emergencies, it's not working. Of course it wasn't. I'd canceled all our joint accounts the week after she left, transferring my half of our savings to a new bank and closing everything else. It was one of the first things any reasonable person did during a separation. I closed it, I said. You what? Why? Because we're separated, Selene. Joint accounts don't make sense anymore. But what if I need something? What if there's an emergency? Then you'll have to handle it yourself, or ask Brick to help. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, her voice had a different quality, less confident, more uncertain. It's not that simple. His money is all tied up in investments and games. He can't just access cash whenever he needs it. Investments and games. That was one way to describe a gambling addiction. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Not for her exactly, but for the situation she was creating for herself. Dan, please. I'm not asking for much. Just keep one card active, with a small limit, just in case. No. What do you mean, no? I mean, no. We're not married anymore in any way that matters. Your financial emergencies are no longer my responsibility. We're still legally married. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you moved in with your boyfriend. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her face as she processed this rejection. Selene wasn't used to being told no, especially not by me. This isn't like you, she said finally. Maybe you never knew me as well as you thought. Don't be cruel, Dan. I'm trying to be civil here. So am I. I'm being honest and direct. If that seems cruel, maybe that says more about what you were expecting than what I'm offering. The background noise on her end got quieter, like she'd moved to a more private location. I made a mistake, she said, her voice smaller now. Leaving the way I did, I should have handled things better. Yes, you should have. But that doesn't mean we can't be mature about this. We were together for 8 years, Dan. That has to count for something. It did count for something. It counted for a lot, actually, but not enough to make me her backup plan or her safety net while she explored other options. I hope things work out for you, I said. I really do. But I'm not going to be your insurance policy while you figure out your new life. So that's it? You're just going to cut me off completely? I'm going to let you make your own choices and live with the consequences. The same way you let me. She was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I never meant for it to happen this way. But it did happen this way. And now we both have to deal with it. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet house and tried to figure out how I felt. There was sadness, certainly. Regret for what we'd lost and how we'd lost it. But there was also something else. Something that felt almost like relief. For the first time since she'd left, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just marking time. My phone buzzed with a text message. I'm sorry for calling. You're right about everything. I hope you can forgive me someday. I read it twice, then deleted it without responding. Some conversations didn't need to continue. The call from Selene had been a turning point, though I didn't realize it immediately. Something had shifted in my perspective, like adjusting the focus on a camera lens. The blurry edges of my new life suddenly became sharp and clear. I started paying attention to things I'd been ignoring. The way my coffee tasted better when I took time to make it properly, instead of gulping it down on my way out the door. The satisfaction of completing a complex security protocol without interruption or complaint. The simple pleasure of watching whatever I wanted on television without negotiating or compromising. Work had become more than just a distraction. It had become a source of genuine pride. The Patterson Industries project was wrapping up ahead of schedule and under budget, earning praise from both the client and my supervisors. Tim had started joking about promoting me to lead security consultant, but I could tell he was only half joking. You've been different lately, he observed during one of our weekly progress meetings. More focused, more confident. Different how? I don't know, like you're playing to win instead of playing not to lose. It was an interesting observation, and probably accurate. For years, I'd approached most aspects of my life defensively, trying to avoid mistakes rather than pursuing opportunities. Marriage to Selene had reinforced that tendency. She was always ready to criticize failures but rarely acknowledged successes. Maybe I'm just getting better at this, I said. Maybe. Or maybe you're finally working for yourself instead of trying to impress someone else. Tim was more perceptive than I'd given him credit for. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went out. Not for groceries or errands, but for the simple pleasure of being somewhere other than home or work. I chose a sports bar near downtown, the kind of place where you could sit alone without seeming pathetic and watch baseball without having to explain why you found it interesting. The bar was called Murphy's, and it had the comfortable shabbiness of a place that had been serving beer and disappointment for decades. The bartender was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of competent efficiency that came from years of dealing with every type of customer imaginable. "What can I get you?" she asked. "Beer. Whatever's on tap and local." She poured a pint of something amber-colored and slid it across the bar. "You look familiar. Do I know you?" "I don't think so. I don't get out much." "Ah, one of those. Well, welcome to Murphy's, where nobody knows your name, and that's exactly how we like it." I settled in to watch the Twins play the White Sox, a game that promised to be as mediocre as both teams' seasons. But there was something soothing about the rhythm of baseball, the way it unfolded without urgency or artificial drama. Halfway through the third inning, my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. I'd been checking Selene's posts less frequently since our phone call, but old habits were hard to break. The latest photo showed her and Brick at what looked like a much smaller casino than their usual haunts. They were sitting at a blackjack table, but instead of the confident poses from earlier posts, they both looked tired. Selene's smile seemed forced, and Brick's eyes had a desperate quality I recognized from my own mirror during the worst days of our marriage. The caption was shorter than usual. "Sometimes you have to play the hand you're dealt." I was studying the image when someone slid onto the bar stool next to me. Checking up on the ex-wife? I looked up to see a man about my age, wearing jeans and a polo shirt that had seen better days. He had the kind of face that suggested he'd been handsome once, but had been worn down by time and experience. "Excuse me?" "Sorry, I couldn't help but notice the Instagram stalking. Been there myself, divorced 3 years ago, and I still check her Facebook sometimes. It's like picking at a scab. You know it's not healthy, but you can't help yourself." I closed the app and put my phone face down on the bar. Is it that obvious? To a fellow survivor? Yeah. I'm Mike, by the way. Mike Sullivan. Dan Farrow. Nice to meet you, Dan. What's your story? I gave him the abbreviated version. 8-year marriage, wife left for a professional gambler, trying to figure out what came next. Mike listened without judgment or unwanted advice, nodding at the appropriate moments. "A poker player, huh?" he said when I finished. "Those guys are either really good at reading people or really good at fooling themselves, sometimes both. You know much about gambling?" "More than I should. My ex-wife went through a phase where she thought she could beat the system. Started with scratch-off tickets, graduated to slot machines, eventually found her way to the poker tables, lost our savings, our house, and finally, our marriage." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Best thing that ever happened to me, even though it didn't feel that way at the time. Forced me to rebuild my life from scratch, figure out who I was when I wasn't trying to fix someone else's problems." He ordered another beer and settled in to watch the game. "The thing about gambling," he continued, "is that it's not really about money. It's about control. The illusion that you can beat randomness through skill or intuition or sheer force of will. Most people figure out pretty quickly that the house always wins. But some people never learn." "What happened to your ex-wife?" "Last I heard, she was working at a call center and living with her sister. The gambling thing burned out eventually, but by then she'd burned through most of her relationships too." We watched the game in comfortable silence for a while. The Twins were losing, but not by much. There was still hope for a late-inning rally. "Can I ask you something?" Mike said during a commercial break. "Sure." "Do you miss her? The ex-wife, I mean." It was a simple question that deserved a simple answer, but I found myself thinking carefully about it. "I miss the idea of her," I said finally. "I miss being married, having someone to share things with. But the actual person she became toward the end? Not really." "That's honest. Most guys aren't willing to admit that." "What about you? Do you miss your ex?" "Sometimes. Usually when I'm sick or when something good happens and I want to tell someone. But then I remember how exhausting it was, always wondering what crisis was coming next, what problem I'd have to solve or debt I'd have to cover. The peace and quiet is worth more than the companionship." My phone buzzed again. Another notification from Instagram, but this time it wasn't Selene. It was Brick, posting a photo of himself alone at a poker table. The caption read, "Sometimes you have to know when to fold." Interesting timing. "Everything okay?" Mike asked. "Yeah, just the ongoing drama of other people's lives. The best kind. All the entertainment, none of the responsibility." We finished our beers and watched the Twins stage a minor comeback that ultimately fell short. It was a fitting metaphor for something, though I wasn't sure what. "I should probably head home," I said, checking the time. "Same here. Early day tomorrow. But hey, if you ever want to grab a beer and complain about the unfairness of life, I'm usually here on Thursday nights." "I might take you up on that." "Please do. Misery loves company, but recovered misery loves it even more." I drove home through quiet streets, thinking about Mike's question. Did I miss Selene? The honest answer was complicated. I missed having someone to talk to, someone who knew my routines and preferences. I missed the comfort of shared history, inside jokes, familiar rhythms. But I didn't miss the criticism, the constant dissatisfaction, the feeling that nothing I did was quite enough. I didn't miss walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate her moods, defending my choices and priorities. At home, I poured myself a glass of wine, something Selene had always claimed was too cheap, but that tasted perfectly fine to me, and settled in front of my laptop. I had some work to catch up on, But first I allowed myself one more check of social media. Selene hadn't posted anything new, but Brick had added another photo. This one showed him walking away from a casino, shoulders slumped, looking defeated. No caption this time. The comments were telling, people asking if he was okay, offering encouragement, sharing their own stories of bad beats and rough streaks. But there were also comments from people asking about money, loans that hadn't been repaid, debts that were coming due. Professional gambling, I was learning, was a lot like professional anything else. The difference between success and failure was often razor thin, and the consequences of failure were usually more severe than most people could handle. I closed the laptop and finished my wine, wondering how long it would be before Selene realized what she'd gotten herself into. Part of me felt sorry for her. She'd been looking for excitement and adventure, not financial ruin and social embarrassment. But another part of me, a part I wasn't entirely proud of, was curious to see how this story would end. After all, I'd already lived through the first act. Now I was just a member of the audience, watching the second act unfold from a safe distance. And sometimes, if I was being completely honest, I was enjoying the show. 2 months after Selene left, I was becoming someone I didn't entirely recognize. Not worse, necessarily, but different. More decisive, less apologetic. The kind of person who said what he meant and meant what he said. The change was most obvious at work. I'd started speaking up in meetings, offering suggestions instead of just implementing other people's ideas. When a client questioned our security recommendations, I defended them with confidence instead of deferring to my supervisors. Tim noticed the shift immediately. "I don't know what happened to you," he said, after I'd successfully argued for a more comprehensive security overhaul with a difficult client. "But I like it. You're acting like someone who knows what he's talking about." Maybe I always knew what I was talking about. Maybe I just wasn't confident enough to say so. What changed? I thought about that question as I drove home through the Minneapolis streets I'd been navigating for years. What had changed? The obvious answer was Selene's departure, but it was more complicated than that. Her leaving had forced me to rely on my own judgment, to make decisions without constantly second-guessing myself or worrying about her approval. It was liberating in ways I hadn't expected. At home, I'd fallen into new routines that would have horrified the old me. I ate dinner standing at the kitchen counter while reading the news on my phone. I left dishes in the sink overnight. I bought groceries based on what I wanted to eat, not what constituted a balanced meal or what was on sale. Small rebellions, but they added up to something larger, a sense of ownership over my own life. My phone rang as I was heating up leftover Chinese food. Unknown number again. "Hello? Dan, it's me." Selene's voice was different this time, smaller, more uncertain. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling." "What's up?" "I need to ask you something. A favor." Here we go, I thought. I'm listening. Things have been a little rough lately. Brick's been having a bad run at the tables, and we're behind on some bills. I was wondering if you could help us out, just temporarily until things turn around. The request was so predictable it was almost funny. The woman who'd left me for a man who wins more in one night than you earn in a year was now asking me to subsidize their lifestyle. "How much are we talking about?" I asked. "Not much. Maybe 2,000, 3 at the most. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'm kind of desperate here. $2,000. More than I spent on groceries in 6 months. More than most people had sitting in their checking accounts. What happened to all of Brick's winnings?" "It's complicated. The gambling world isn't as stable as regular income. There are ups and downs, and right now we're in a down period." "I see. And what makes you think this down period is temporary?" "Because Brick knows what he's doing. He's been playing professionally for years. This is just a rough patch." I could hear the desperation in her voice, but also something else. The sound of someone trying to convince herself as much as me. "Selene, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I want you to give me an honest answer." "Okay." How much money has Brick actually won since you've been together? Silence. Long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. It's not that simple, she said finally. You have to look at the big picture, the long-term trends. That's not an answer. He's won plenty, but he's also had some bad luck, some unexpected expenses. What kind of expenses? Just things. Debts from before I met him. Investments that didn't work out. Debts and investments. The classic euphemisms for gambling losses and loan shark payments. I can't help you, I said. Please, Dan. I'm not asking for charity. I'll pay you back as soon as things improve. With what money? With Brick's winnings. He's due for a big score. I can feel it. The desperation was painful to listen to. She'd bought into the gambler's eternal optimism, the belief that the next hand would fix everything. I'm sorry, but the answer is no. Why are you being so stubborn? It's not like you can't afford it. Actually, I could afford it. The mortgage payments were smaller without Selene's expenses, and I'd been saving money by cooking at home and avoiding the restaurants and entertainment she'd always insisted on. But affording it wasn't the point. It's not about the money, I said. Then what is it about? It's about consequences. You made a choice to leave our marriage for a more exciting life. Now you're living with the results of that choice. That's cruel. It's reality. Actions have consequences, Selene. You can't gamble with your life and then expect someone else to cover your losses. I could hear her crying softly on the other end of the line. Once upon a time, that sound would have broken my heart, would have made me agree to anything to make it stop. Now it just made me sad for both of us. What am I supposed to do? She asked. Figure it out, the same way everyone else does when they're in trouble. I don't know how. Then maybe it's time to learn. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen and tried to process what had just happened. The conversation felt like a test I'd passed, but not one I'd enjoyed taking. My phone buzzed with a text message. You've changed. The old Dan would have helped me. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. You're right. He would have. And that's exactly why you left him. She didn't respond. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking about that conversation more than I wanted to, not because I regretted my decision, but because it had crystallized something I'd been trying to understand about our relationship. Selene had never wanted a partner. She'd wanted a safety net, someone reliable and steady who would be there when the excitement wore off or when her adventures went wrong. The old Dan had been perfect for that role, supportive, accommodating, always ready to solve her problems or cushion her falls. But safety nets only worked if you were willing to fall into them. Selene had wanted the security of knowing I was there without the limitation of actually being with me. She'd wanted to have her cake and eat it too. The realization should have made me angry, but instead it made me feel oddly grateful. Her leaving had forced me to stop being someone else's backup plan and start being the protagonist of my own life. My phone rang again that evening. This time it was Naomi. I heard Selene called you, she said without preamble. The gossip network strikes again? Jenna told Marla, who told someone at the hospital, who told me. Apparently she's been telling people you refused to help her in her time of need. That's one way to describe it. What's another way? I declined to enable her poor financial decisions. Naomi laughed. I like this version of you better. What do you mean? You're not apologizing for existing anymore. It's refreshing. I never apologized for existing. Dan, you apologized for everything, for working late, for wanting to watch sports, for not being exciting enough, for not making enough money. You spent so much energy trying to be what Selene wanted that you forgot to be yourself. She was right, though I hadn't seen it that way at the time. I'd thought I was being considerate, accommodating. In reality, I'd been slowly erasing myself. So what happens now? Naomi asked. Now I figure out what I actually want my life to look like. Any ideas? A few. I'm thinking about applying for that promotion Tim mentioned. Maybe taking some classes, learning new skills. I might even try online dating eventually. Eventually? When I'm ready. When I've figured out who I am without Selene. That's very mature of you. Don't sound so surprised. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I looked at my finances. Really looked at them. Not just the basic checking and savings accounts, but everything. Retirement funds, investments, the equity in the house. The numbers were better than I'd expected. Without Selene's spending habits, I was actually ahead of where I'd been a year ago. The house payment was manageable on my salary alone, and I'd been automatically saving money just by not trying to keep up with her lifestyle. For the first time in years, I felt financially secure. Not wealthy, but stable, independent. I closed the laptop and poured myself a glass of wine, then settled in to watch a baseball game without having to justify my choice or negotiate for the remote. It was a small pleasure, but it felt like a victory. My phone buzzed with another Instagram notification. I'd been checking less frequently, but curiosity got the better of me. The post was from Brick, and it was different from his usual confident proclamations. It was a photo of him sitting alone in what looked like a cheap diner, staring at a cup of coffee. The caption read, "Rock bottom has a way of clarifying your priorities." The comments were a mix of sympathy and advice, but also questions about money and debts. People were starting to realize that his winning streak had turned into something else entirely. I scrolled through Selene's recent posts and found a similar pattern. The expensive restaurants had been replaced by fast food. The luxury hotels had given way to budget motels. Her captions had become shorter and less frequent. The adventure was turning into something neither of them had bargained for. I closed the app and finished my wine, wondering how long it would be before she called again. Because she would call again. I was certain of that. When things got desperate enough, when all other options were exhausted, she'd remember that I was still here. Still reliable, still steady, still willing to listen, even if I was no longer willing to rescue her. The difference was that now I knew the conversation would be on my terms, not hers. And for the first time in years, that felt like exactly where I wanted to be. The call came on a Thursday night in late November, 3 months after our last conversation. I was at Murphy's with Mike, watching the Vikings disappoint another generation of fans, when my phone buzzed with Selene's number. "You going to answer that?" Mike asked, noting my hesitation. "Probably should. She doesn't call unless things are really bad." I stepped outside into the cold Minneapolis air. "Hello, Selene." "Dan." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to bother you." "What's wrong?" "Everything." She started crying then, not the manipulative tears I remembered from our fights, but the raw, exhausted sobs of someone who'd finally hit bottom. "Brick's gone. He left yesterday, took what little money we had left and just disappeared." I wasn't surprised, but I tried to keep that out of my voice. "I'm sorry to hear that." "I don't have anywhere to go. Jenna kicked me out last week. I couldn't pay my share of the rent. I've been staying in cheap motels, but I'm almost out of money." The practical part of my brain started calculating. 3 months of high-stakes living followed by a crash landing. Whatever savings she'd had from our marriage was probably gone, along with anything Brick might have contributed. "What about your job?" "I lost it 2 weeks ago. Too many absences, too many personal calls during work hours. My boss said I wasn't reliable anymore." The irony was almost perfect. She'd left me for excitement and adventure, and now she was discovering what life looked like without reliability and stability. "I need help," she continued. "I don't know what else to do." "What kind of help?" "Just a place to stay for a few days. Until I can figure things out. I'll sleep on the couch. I won't get in your way. Please, Dan. I'm desperate." The old me would have said yes immediately, would have rushed to her rescue without thinking about the consequences or what it might mean for my carefully rebuilt life. The new me took a moment to consider. Where are you now? A motel on University Avenue, the kind that rents by the hour. I knew the area. It wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't somewhere you wanted to spend more time than necessary. Give me the address. I'll come pick you up. Really? You'll help me? I'll come get you. We'll talk about the rest when I see you. I went back inside to explain the situation to Mike, who listened with the expression of someone who'd been through similar drama. You sure about this? He asked. No, but I can't leave her on the street. Just remember, you're doing her a favor, not the other way around. Don't let her convince you otherwise. The motel was exactly as depressing as I'd expected. Selene was waiting in the parking lot with a single suitcase and a garbage bag full of what looked like her remaining possessions. She looked smaller than I remembered, worn down by months of stress and disappointment. Thank you, she said as she got into my car. I know I don't deserve this. We'll figure it out. The drive home was quiet. She stared out the window at the city she'd been exploring with such enthusiasm just a few months earlier. Now it probably looked different to her, less full of possibility, more full of places where things had gone wrong. At the house, I showed her to the spare bedroom where I'd stored her belongings. Your stuff is all here, I said. I figured you'd want it back eventually. She looked around the room like she was seeing artifacts from a previous life. I can't believe how stupid I was. You weren't stupid. You were looking for something different. I was selfish and naive and completely wrong about everything. I didn't disagree, but I didn't pile on either. She was doing a good enough job of that herself. Are you hungry? I asked. Starving. I haven't eaten since yesterday. I made sandwiches while she sat at the kitchen table, looking around at the space she'd abandoned. It probably looked different to her too. Not the prison she'd been escaping from, but the stability she'd thrown away. The house looks good, she said. You've been taking care of it. It's not that hard when it's just me. She winced at the implication. Dan, I need to tell you something. About Brick, about what happened. You don't owe me explanations. Yes, I do. You deserve to know the truth. She told me the whole story then, how Brick's winning streak had ended almost immediately after she moved in with him, how he'd been borrowing money from increasingly dangerous people to stay in games he couldn't afford, how he'd been using her credit cards and her connections to fund his gambling. He wasn't a professional poker player, she said. He was just a guy with a serious problem who was good at hiding it, at least for a while. How much did you lose? Everything. My savings, my credit rating, my job. He even forged my signature on some loan documents. I might be liable for debts I didn't even know about. The magnitude of her situation was starting to become clear. This wasn't just about being broke. She was potentially in legal and financial trouble that could take years to resolve. What are you going to do? I don't know. I was hoping maybe you could help me figure it out. There it was. The real reason she'd called. The real reason she was here. Not just for a place to stay, but for someone to fix the mess she'd made of her life. Selene, I need to be clear about something. I'm willing to help you get back on your feet, but I'm not going to solve all your problems. You're going to have to do most of the work yourself. I understand. Do you? Because the last time we talked, you seemed to think I owed you something. That our history meant I should bail you out without question. I was wrong. I was desperate and scared, and I said things I shouldn't have said. What's different now? She thought about that for a long time. Now I know what it's like to have nowhere else to turn, to realize that you've burned all your bridges except one, and you're not even sure that one will hold. It was the most honest thing she'd said to me in years. Okay, I said, here's what I'm willing to do. You can stay here for 2 weeks while you figure out your next steps. I'll help you contact a lawyer about the debt situation and a financial counselor about rebuilding your credit. But after 2 weeks, you need to have a plan for moving forward. What if I can't find a job in 2 weeks? Then you'll have to find somewhere else to look for one. This is temporary help, not a permanent solution. She nodded, tears starting again. Why are you being so nice to me, after everything I did? It was a good question, one I'd been asking myself during the drive home. Because, despite everything that happened between us, I don't want to see you homeless or in serious legal trouble. And because helping you get back on your feet is the right thing to do. Is there any chance? She started, then stopped. Any chance of what? That we could try again? That maybe this whole experience taught us both something about what really matters? I'd been expecting this question, dreading it actually, because the honest answer was complicated. No, I said. There's no chance of that. Why not? We were good together once. We were. But that was a long time ago, and we're both different people now. I could change. I could be the person I was when we first met. I don't want you to change back, and I don't want to change back either. I like who I'm becoming without you. It was harsh, but true. The month since she'd left had been the most personally satisfying of my adult life. I'd discovered parts of myself that had been buried under years of compromise and accommodation. So this is just charity? Helping your pathetic ex-wife out of pity? It's not pity, it's closure, for both of us. She went to bed early, exhausted by months of stress and the emotional weight of our conversation. I stayed up late, wondering if I'd made the right decision by bringing her home. But as I sat in my quiet living room, drinking wine and watching the late news, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid of her presence anymore. She couldn't manipulate me or make me feel guilty or inadequate. She was just someone I used to be married to who needed help. The power dynamic had completely shifted, and we both knew it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. How did it go? I typed back. She's staying for 2 weeks. After that, she's on her own. Good for you. Stay strong. I would. Because for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was and what I was worth. And it was more than I'd ever imagined. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and bacon. Selene was in the kitchen, making breakfast with the kind of domestic enthusiasm she'd never shown during our marriage. Good morning, she said brightly. I thought I'd make us breakfast, as a thank you. You don't need to do that. I want to, it's the least I can do. I sat down at the table and watched her work. She was trying hard, too hard, to be the perfect house guest. It was probably going to be a long 2 weeks. Dan, she said as she set a plate in front of me, I've been thinking about what you said last night. About closure. Yeah. I think you're right. We both need to move forward. But I want you to know that leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life. I know you think that now. I'll always think that. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I threw it away for a fantasy. I ate my breakfast and considered my response. She was probably being sincere, but sincerity didn't change the fundamental facts of our situation. The thing is, Selene, even if I believed you'd learned from this experience, even if I thought you'd never make the same mistake again, it still wouldn't matter. Why not? Because I've learned something too. I've learned that I don't want to be someone's safe choice. I don't want to be the reliable option you settle for when the exciting options don't work out. That's not what you'd be. Yes, it is. And we'd both know it. Every time we had a fight, every time things got routine or boring, we'd both remember that you left me once for something better. That would poison everything. She started crying again, but quietly this time. So there's really no chance? There's no chance of us getting back together. But there's every chance that we can both build better lives separately. What if I can't? What if I'm too messed up now? Then you'll figure it out, because you don't have any other choice. It was the truth, even if it wasn't particularly comforting. Sometimes the truth wasn't supposed to be comforting. After breakfast, we spent the morning making phone calls. A lawyer who specialized in debt resolution, a credit counseling service, a few employment agencies. By noon, she had appointments scheduled for the following week and a clearer picture of what she was facing. "It's going to take years to fix this," she said, after hanging up with the credit counselor. "Probably. But at least now you know what you're dealing with." "I can't believe I let him talk me into signing those loan documents." "You can't change that now. You can only decide what to do next." She spent the afternoon filling out paperwork and making lists of debts and assets. It was depressing work, but necessary, like cleaning an infected wound, painful, but required for healing. That evening, as we sat in the living room watching television, she asked the question I'd been expecting since she'd arrived. "Do you hate me?" "No." "Are you angry?" "Not anymore." "What do you feel when you look at me?" I thought about that carefully. Sad, mostly, for what we lost and how we lost it, but also grateful. Grateful? Your leaving forced me to become someone I like better, someone stronger and more independent. I wouldn't have done that if you'd stayed. So, in a weird way, I did you a favor? In a weird way, yes. She smiled for the first time since I'd picked her up. Well, that's something, I guess. It's more than something. It's everything. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a movie neither of us was particularly interested in. It felt strange to have her in the house again, but not uncomfortable. More like having a distant relative visit. Familiar, but not intimate. "Dan? Yeah? When I leave here in 2 weeks, I don't think we should stay in touch." "Why not?" "Because I need to learn how to live without you. Really live, not just survive. And I can't do that if I'm always thinking about what you'd do or what you'd think about my choices." It was probably the wisest thing she'd said since arriving. "I think that's a good idea." "Will you miss me?" "I'll miss the idea of you, but I think I'll be okay." "Me too. Eventually." The movie ended, and we both went to our separate bedrooms. As I lay in bed, listening to the familiar sounds of someone else in the house, I realized that this really was closure. Not the dramatic, emotional kind you see in movies, but the quiet, practical kind that happens in real life. In 2 weeks, she'd be gone again. This time, we'd both be ready for it. And this time, I'd be betting on myself. The final line of my story had already been written. Sometimes, when you stop trying to beat the house, you realize you were the house all along.